What's needed to hook people into coming in as an inpatient?
A recognition that they have a problem with alcohol.
And how can you help them recognise that?
Get them to start to look at what's been going on in their lives. Allow them to talk, some time and space to talk. And it might be initially as an outpatient. Maybe inviting them to join one of the alcohol support groups, still as a drinking member, but starting to thinking about doing something about stopping, contemplating. And then moving them into the cycle of change as quickly as possible so that they can realise that they can do something for themselves as opposed to everybody else doing for them or blaming them. They take some responsibility for themselves, responsibility for their drinking. Makes it a lot easier when they do come in.
How realistic is it to expect someone to be just sort of seen once and then suddenly agree to come in?
That depends on the individual. I think some people come along half suspecting or half knowing, not half suspecting, half knowing that they've got a problem, but not being able to put a voice to it. So when they come along for an assessment, they then may be able to talk about the amounts they're drinking, the effects it's having on their work and their families and themselves. And so they may, after an initial assessment, feel able to come in. I don't think that's impossible. Generally, you may need to have 2 or 3 sessions with them before they'll pick up on the drink part of their problem. And but if there's depression, if there's depression involved, you may be able to bring them in with the depression and then look at the way they're dealing with the depression, which would be the drink or drugs for them.
That's what I was going to say, is that often people are coming in because they've got a resistant depression and they've tried every antidepressant under the sun and nothing's worked. And when we talk to them, we actually recognise that there is a drinking pattern there, and I think perhaps Sally sees it more on night duty when people can't sleep because they actually haven't got the alcohol here to sleep, and then she'll begin to talk to them and then gradually the story will come out. And we often find that people are less than truthful if they're not coming in for an alcohol problem as to how much they're drinking. When it begins to come out, then you recognise why they're depressed. It's because they drink far too much.
What sort of tricks do you use to get them to talk about their drinking?
Tricks? That sounds like we're devious.
As if. I mean, there is one thing, if somebody has come for an outpatient appointment, sometimes it's better not to let them go home and keep them in and get them into a bed and sort of manoeuvre it round so that this is what they really need and it's a nice place here really, and we need to get them settled down, have a sleep, and then we can talk about it in the morning, which you could say is a trick as such, but sometimes it is a lot better not to let them go home, even just to collect, inverted commas, their things, because often the collection includes alcohol or drugs on the way back. So that's one trick I would say of getting them to come in.
And maybe another is when they're talking about it, if they're slightly vague, you can use perhaps a few phrases that actually trip them up without them realising it, and then they're sort of hooked into our way of thinking, perhaps.
And sometimes they come along because the families pressurise them. And they'll say, I don't have a problem, the family's pushed me in, and you'll say, well, I wonder why the family think you've got a problem, and then you can lead it on from that. That's I found quite a useful ploy sometimes. Why do the family think that? Why would they think that? What is it that you're doing that makes them think that kind of thing?
And very often getting them involved in a group, alcohol support group, as they hear from others, and it's the realisation perhaps then that they're not the only one, and that other people have been down that road. Very, a lot of similarities, as opposed to all the differences which they tend to look for.
So you're saying you can have people come into the alcohol group who are continuing to drink?
Yes. But hopefully very quickly we turn that round, because we can't have them continuing to drink long term. Very quickly we turn it round into perhaps an admission. And they work that out for themselves quite quickly, because the pressure then comes from the group, and it always works better if it's coming from other non-drinking people.
Well, what sort of timescale would you be talking about?
What, allowing them to come to group? Probably 2 or 3 groups at the most. And by the time of the second group, we would be seeing them afterwards, if the penny hadn't dropped. But very often we've found the penny's dropped and they want to do something about it, because otherwise they wouldn't come back to the group. Somehow there seems to be a need to belong.
And also the other group members will say, oh yeah, we used to say that, or we used to do that, and they've actually stopped. Or
and did you do so? Oh yes, I did that one as well.
That's where their sort of peer pressure comes from. And it is knowing that they're with like-minded people, I think, that helps them, that, as Sally said, they're not the only one. And it's something that's sort of swept under the carpet a lot. It's not spoken about. They're made to feel guilty about it. And when you've got people talking in a group that are open and honest and being able to say exactly how they feel, it's almost like a sense of relief for them, that they can actually be honest and admit to what's happening for them.
Tell me about the attractions of inpatient detox.
Well, from my perspective, one of the big attractions is you can monitor people closely. What's not always recognised is just how dangerous detoxing from alcohol is anyway, that there's a danger of fits, which people aren't aware of. They're not always open about the amounts that they drink, so the medication that we give them may not be enough initially, so we can monitor things like that. We can monitor for any other adverse effects. I personally have nursed somebody who came in looking very white and pale and finished up in hospital with heart failure, and that was a direct consequence of the drinking. So you can monitor all those things, and I have to say it's very much alive still.
It's taking them out of the drinking environment, whether the drinking environment's at home, in the pub, work, social, wherever it might be, to actually remove them from their drinking environment and from some of the external pressures. Can make a huge difference.
And I think the thing is here that people are not judged because they've got a drinking problem. They're treated like human beings, and that's very important to them, because they often feel very guilty, very vulnerable, very ashamed, and we want to make them feel at ease, comfortable, and help them through the initial first few days, which sometimes is quite dramatic for them.
What do you see as being the role of nursing staff with addiction patients?
Well, we are the carers. We are the people that monitor their detox. We are looking for the symptoms of detox, whether they're comfortable enough, make sure they're not shaky, sweating. They've suffered enough, they don't need to suffer anymore. So we will talk to the consultant about getting the medication levels right.
Education, major part, without a doubt.
Because very often they're not just alcoholics. There are other associated isms, like workaholic. Very often they crave work and use that as an escape from reality. It comes with the education, is they have to be so careful they don't use work, whether it's work in exercise, being busy doing, because if they're busy doing, they're not thinking. If they're not thinking, they're not feeling. So it takes away the need to drink, but they need to learn to be able to feel and be themselves, which may go back many, many years for them.
It's often very difficult for people with alcohol problems to sit still and just be, because if they, without their alcohol inside them, they can't do that, because they often say there's lots of painful memories, feelings, thoughts come up, and they can't cope with them. So they're off doing other things, and they can very quickly become addicted to other things.
But it's also the triggers, the things that trigger the thought of drinking. I mean, nothing can make them drink, but it does trigger the thought of drinking. So it gets back to the education bit about enabling people to look at what their triggers might be and how they can deal with them. The agencies that are available to them, AA and people like that.
And really getting them to take responsibility for their recovery by taking responsibility for their drinking in the first place, which again is education.
Or maybe looking at anxiety management and assertion, anger management. There's lots of reasons why people drink, and one of course is that people are afraid to be angry, and if they drink then they're not, that it might make them happier, feel happier, maybe less depressed. So it's a great range of things, really.
So when people leave the inpatient side of things, what happens then?
They're encouraged to use a support network, and we do have a support group which we run on the Tuesday. There's a smaller group that's run by Sally on a Monday. There's another group on a Thursday which are educational type groups. So we encourage people to come along to those sort of groups. We also encourage them to maintain contact with people that can be helpful to them, who are not going to pull them back into drinking. They're looking at networks like AA particularly, because that's a very strong network for drinkers. So those kind of things. And we encourage diaries and workbooks, things like that.
And on the whole, people come back probably for about 3 months on a weekly basis. Then they drop down to fortnightly, and then would go into the Thursday aftercare group monthly.
In what way does this work differ from other aspects of psychiatric nursing?
Perhaps we're more confronting, working with people who have drink problems, drug problems, in that they're not or shouldn't be allowed to get away with certain behaviour patterns which may or may not include drinking. Often the admission is shorter, and there is an expectation of them to do a lot more work, I think. They write their own recovery plans. We help them, but they write their own recovery plans. They write a good recovery plan, they stick to it, it works. Very often they don't slip or relapse. If they don't do it, that's what can end up happening.
Do you think this sort of work appeals to certain sorts of nurses?
Oh yes. Yes. The bad ones.
The bad ones or the mad ones?
The mad ones. Yes, I personally didn't want to do this kind of nursing. I wanted to do psychotherapy, and I got pushed into this by accident, and I really liked it. But I found the majority of my colleagues thought I was completely mad. Oh, you don't want to do something like that. It's so thankless. It's so heartbreaking. You know, you put a lot of effort in for very little reward, and I haven't found that.
I became interested in this because my grandmother was an alcoholic. My father never touched a drink the whole of his life, but all he knew was alcohol behaviour because he was brought up by his mother from the age of 2 after his father died. He was always the carer. He was the baby of the family. He was always the carer, but the alcohol behaviour was very dysfunctional, so I was brought up in a dysfunctional family. Luckily, I was able to recognise that and do something about it, so I like to help people to stop their drinking and help them and the family to get back to a normal family life.
Do you find it rewarding?
It's a challenge. And what's nice is Christmas last year, we had a Christmas card from someone who was here, I think it was nearly 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm now married, I live on the Isle of Wight, I've got 2 children, And that's perhaps the reward to hear, and we think, who was it? And when we get together and talk about it, we do remember them, and that's the nice bit to hear.
And also somebody emailed us from Turkey to say that they had given up the rat race. They were out there, were now going to run a hotel business which was going to be no alcohol, and they hoped that maybe we would be able to use them in the future if anybody wanted to holiday, their first holiday abroad where they wanted to feel safe. So yes, and we get people that pop back on their anniversaries or their birthdays, as they usually call them. They've been sober for 1 to 7 to 9 years, and they pop back and they will talk to the members of the group, and that actually gives other people encouragement as well that it can be done.